meeting. And Drew is not here, so apologies if we scramble a little bit on the technical side, but he needed some well-deserved days off. So welcome everyone to the Climate Action Advisory Committee. At this point, it does not look like we have a quorum by far. However, one of the items on our agenda today is to address some ways to achieve that more consistently.
If we don't have a quorum, is there any way we could actually make the change, or is that something that's in the power of the?
So the option now is if we want to continue as a committee of the whole. These items are informational, and for the discussion purposes, we can still have the discussion. Sure. Feedback can still be provided. So if it's okay with everyone, we will continue. And so in that case, the meeting minutes will get bumped to the next time. And then for folks that are online, either taking advantage of the AB 2449, you don't need to worry about it. We will all essentially be members of the public today. So continuing, let's begin with introductions. And we will go down the jurisdiction list. Don't see anyone from Cloverdale or Katati. Healdsburg, I saw Ty online. Like to introduce yourself?
I'm Ty Benoit from Healdsburg.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say that Stephanie was planning to be there in person today, but she's unable to do that. So maybe she contacted you.
I didn't see anything, but she's not alone.
Okay. Yeah, she had sick kids. So anyway, we're sorry.
No problem. And for Petaluma, I know Andy is out, but Pete Gang, Petaluma. Excellent. And for Rohnert Park,
Shirley Johnson's here. I don't see Julie anymore.
yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't see her online. And for Santa Rosa,
Steve Bertelbaum.
excellent. And so that's the
Zainul Shading, your show is excusing himself. I don't know whether you heard from him, your show.
I have not heard anything.
Yeah, he couldn't, maybe they changed the month.
Okay.
For the,
yeah, and I appreciate everyone for coming with that change. We just really wanted to put this GHG item in front of everyone. And so no.
David Williams.
Excellent. Don't see anyone from Windsor today. And for Horseshoes District, who we have two?
We've got two. We've got myself, Tom Conlon, from Sonoma Valley, but representing Chris Horseshoes District, and online.
I saw Tyler, so yeah.
Online, we've got Tyler Sylvie.
Excellent.
Hello, Tyler Sylvie, 3rd District.
Thank you, Tyler. And then I don't see Jake or that district. Or I don't see anyone from District 5 today as well. So continuing forward.
Oh, hi. This is June from District 5, but I couldn't make it in today. Sorry.
I was rushing. I apologize. Thank you for attending. There. So we will proceed to the first item, which is going to be presented by BC CAAC. This is preliminary results from the RCPA greenhouse gas inventory. Share that presentation if you'd like.
Very good. Thank you, Ross. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is BC CAAC, Climate Programs Manager here with RCPA. And Ross is going to bring up my presentation. So as many of you are aware, we've been working for the last few months on doing our biannual update of our greenhouse gas inventory, which we do at the countywide scale for community-wide emissions across a number of different sectors. And let's see, just saw a note from that.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Very good. Wanted to provide some preliminary results and get some bit of feedback from this group. Our plan is that over the course of the next week and a half, I'm going to be finalizing these numbers and preparing our narrative report. That'll then be presented to our board of directors in early July. And we presented some of this initial information to our jurisdictional partners at our members and partners meeting about a week and a half ago, and I've gotten detailed comments back from Healdsburg and from Windsor, as well as a number of general comments, and kind of wanted to share this information with you all here today. So let's see, with that, go ahead, let's go to the next slide, Ross. So just a little bit of a brief review. Again, as many of you are aware, RCPA has been conducting an inventory like this for a number of years. The first one was done in 2016, and that was done as part of our Climate Action 2020 effort. The original inventory was conducted by a team of consultants. As part of that project, they calculated numbers for 2010 and then a 1990 backcast, which sets our kind of historic numbers that we're working against. And then over the course of 2018, 2020, 2022, and now 2024, our CPA staff have worked internally to update those results every 2 years. And so, as I mentioned, these will be presented to the board then next month. And I guess the last thing I wanted to highlight on this slide was starting this year, I've been working with Adam Garcia, our data analyst here on staff, who and we have been working. We've created an online climate dashboard. I'm pretty sure we gave a preview of that to this group at the last meeting. In preparation for this inventory release, I'm working with Adam to basically upload all of the updated data into that inventory or into that dashboard. So hopefully by the time we present to the board of directors, basically everything will be synced and online for public viewing. And then Adam and I are working along with an outside consultant on upgrades to that dashboard that will be, which we will be implementing over the course of the second half of this year and early next year. And so our plan is for the initial, in the very short term, we're going to be updating the numbers that are in the current dashboard. And then over the course of the next few months, we'll be upgrading that dashboard with additional kind of functions and features. So I think with that, let's move on. So here is kind of an overarching chart of all of the numbers. A couple of just take-home messages that I've gotten from this. And so the first handful of these slides are included as part of the meeting agenda packet, and you'll have those either as part of the PDF or as a printed copy here. I've then added some additional slides that we'll go through that did not go out with the meeting agenda. But this graph here really kind of shows the downward trend of our greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2020. I think the key take-home message here is we were all very excited with the 2020 numbers that we were very close to hitting our target that we had set for 2020. One question, and as we've done the inventory for 2022, it's kind of unfortunate, but not too surprising to see that some of those numbers have creeped back up just a little bit. And my understanding or my kind of take from that is really that 2020 was that was really when COVID-19 hit. There was a lot of economic shutdown, economic slowdown. There was a lot of things that impacted that 2020 value. And I think that we're seeing that that was an artificially low number by a few percent, and that we're now seeing that the 2022 numbers are returning to something a little bit more akin to kind of that general gentle downward trend that we've been expecting. And so I think that over the course of the upcoming inventories in the next couple of years, we'll see if that's kind of proven out. But really the 2020 was kind of a bit of an anomalous year. We stuck with our schedule and kind of did it. But kind of seeing that those numbers unfortunately then kind of look to creep back up. The other key thing here to highlight off in the left-hand or in the right-hand column, I've just called out our 5 major sectors, greenhouse gas emission sectors that we track. and really showing at the top is transportation at 58%, and buildings at between 23 and 24%. And so really between the two of those 70, so that's over 80% of our emissions profile really comes from the transportation and the building energy sectors. And so that's, I think we've known that for quite a while, but these numbers kind of continue to show, to prove that out. Next slide, Ross. Exact same numbers here, just presented in a slightly different way. And this is showing it then where one can see the kind of the trend by sector, and you can see the relative scale of sectors from one to another. So as you can see, the building energy is really showing that sharp downward trend that we've identified from past inventories. Transportation is showing downward trend, but is, has been up and down. Water, solid waste, and ag all kind of have their own individual characteristics, but you can see from this the relative small scale or the smaller scale of those sectors kind of compared to the big buckets of building and transportation. Next one, please. Yeah, large slide, lots of numbers to kind of digest here. I put some red boxes around the final column. These are showing our percent share by sector. So those in the top chart there, those are the same numbers that I pulled out into that right-hand column that showed the kind of the size of the sectors compared to each other. And in the bottom chart, this kind of shows our percentage compared to 1990. So we can still see that we are downward. We have over 20% of reduction since 1990, but that is slightly less of a reduction that we showed in 2020. So again, we just kind of seeing that those numbers, and I don't know how exactly to phrase it, they've crept back up, but it's more the matter of, I think they're showing, I think we're just taking it as a lesson that 2020 was a little bit of a, that there's an asterisk that has been and will always be kind of around that era, around those numbers having to do with COVID-19 and the shutdown then. And so now I wanted to take a minute and I wanted to take a minute and dive a little bit more in depth into what leads into these numbers. And I could walk through this. We could go into much depth about this, but I just wanted to take a quick walk through each of the sectors. So starting with building energy, this is really the building energy sector is made up of 3 subsectors. We track electricity consumption, natural gas consumption, and what we call stationary sources. We have very little industry. So in some other places that have factories or industrial uses, that's where the stationary sources are captured. For Sonoma County, we really use that subsector to capture the use of propane, kerosene, and wood for heating and cooking purposes. And so really electricity is, electricity consumption that we gather from PG&E, from Sonoma Clean Power, and from Healdsburg Electric.
Recording in progress.
We're getting a little feedback.
Oh, this is on.
Is that
Yeah, I have my microphone off, I have my video on, but obviously I'm not off.
I'll also turn off your microphone. No problem.
Here, let's see.
All good.
Okay, let's see if that helps then. So, so then we have those three subsectors, and then if we go on to the next slide, Ross, you can kind of see here, this is zeroing in on those building energy emissions. This is kind of the total, this is showing all 3 of those subsectors combined. And on the next, Ross, we'll see, here's our electricity trend, and you can see the dramatic drop that is really, I think, attributable to much of the decarbonization and electrification work that's done.
You would expect electrification to be starting to show an uptick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try now?
Here,
Sorry.
what's that?
This is emissions, not kilowatt hours.
Right, so this is emissions, so this is showing emissions, and I do have, but have not shared, have not included here the charts. I could also create many of these same charts that really show the consumption values, and then we could compare those consumption values versus emissions values. And in that case, I think it would show that our electricity mix has gotten much cleaner over over the time period.
This fund.
Exactly. So if you go to the next slide, so this is showing natural gas emissions. And we can see that this is still, these are still very, a very level trend with some small reductions. But really it's, I think this shows the tough nugget of reducing natural gas. And so, so it just kind of shows that we can see electricity has made a huge success story. Natural gas emissions, I think, is something we need to continue to work on.
And it's not weather normalized either.
And that is not weather normalized. That was something staff member from the city of Healdsburg had asked me about that, whether we could look into normalizing that that data that would at least start to show a little bit of variation from year to year, depending upon how much heating was needed, but still, I don't think it would influence that trend that dramatically.
Yeah, for what's worth, I don't recommend that necessarily, just as an analytical lens on 2-year comparisons.
Very good, very good.
And would there be any value in looking at that on a cabin, like for a household or for average household or something like that?
Yes, and I'm not going to, we won't have time today to fully show all those graphs, but I do have a sample of some graphs that I put together that basically then break all these out by emissions by countywide or by jurisdiction versus per capita, per household number, and per employment number. And then that will allow us to then see kind of both. It's an easier way to cross compare against jurisdictions.
We have a hand up from Ty.
Oh, go ahead, please, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ty.
Well, that was my same question about getting the information by jurisdiction, because last year Healdsburg was the highest, and Sonoma Clean Power had done such a good job of reducing emissions. So thank you for making that available to
Sure.
jurisdictions. And I know that'll be on the dashboard, but what was really helpful for us in Healdsburg was to have that one set of charts that you did where you broke it out in your presentation by jurisdiction.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Thank you.
I think as I wrap up, when I wrap up on this, I wanted to show the example of what I've put together for the town of Windsor first, because I was talking with their staff, but I will then replicating that for each of the jurisdictions. And it's an expanded view of some of those charts that were included last time based upon their feedback from Windsor. So,
Okay.
So let's see. I'll go ahead and talk through transportation really quick. Transportation is made up of 3 subsectors again. On-road transportation, which is really taking our Sonoma County, our SCTA travel model outputs and comparing those with emissions factor database from the California Air Resources Board. We then look at off-road transportation, which is really coming out directly from the CARB MFAC database. They provide county level data. And then we also work with SMART to track the amount of diesel that's used for the locomotive. And we basically cross compare the total amount of diesel usage and versus the rail miles that are within Sonoma County versus Marin County. And for SMART, we end up categorizing those as countywide emissions as opposed to attributing them back to any individual jurisdiction. So Ross, we can go through the next couple slides. So here we're seeing transportation emission trends. And you can see kind of a dramatic, a fairly nice drop from 2018 to 2020, creeping back up in 2022. Again, then we'll go to the next one. So here's off-road. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back one step. I misspoke a second ago. This is not on-road. This is total transportation emissions. So this is all three subsectors combined. Now we can go to the next slide. Here's on-road emissions. You can kind of see, yeah, a small drop 2020 and 2022. We can go to the next one for off-road, and here you can see a kind of a downward trend, and this is coming directly out of CARB. One thing I wanted to note here, we have a couple of subsectors. Off-road transportation is one of them, in which the data that is available now for 2010 through current has been updated and is higher quality. The information that's available for 1990 has not been updated in that same fashion. We're continuing to use our 1990 historic value. It is a question in my mind, and we won't try to do this for in the next, for this inventory release, but this is one of the areas where that 1990 value, we've wanted to hold it firm because that's kind of our published historic value, but it is a question in my mind as whether or not we should go back and revisit that number to at least clarify, potentially there could be some modifications made to that. And then we can go to the next slide. Here we see this is zeroing in on passenger rail for SMART. And this is really showing they've only been in operation for our inventories in 2018, 2020, and 2022. And this is really this is a direct linear relationship between basically the number of trains and the diesel usage they've used. So the more SMART trains that are being run, the more diesel they're using, the higher their emissions look. One of the sections that will be included in the narrative report that was specifically requested by SMART was a discussion about that they are actually a net reducer of GHG emissions, and that we really wanted to present in a narrative fashion the fact that, yes, they are creating some emissions from the diesel use, but overall the trips they take off the road have such a dramatic decrease.
So you have a hand up from Ty.
Here, why don't we go to Ty.
Go ahead, Ty.
So thanks again. I think it's great that we're doing these SMART emissions. I just want to go on the record, and I think there were a number of us that made this point, that if we're calculating countywide emissions for SMART, we should be calculating it for Sonoma County Airport. And I know that's a controversial topic, but you're showing us this before it goes to the RCPA. And I don't know about the rest of you, but Healdsburg is right in the flight path. And there are so many more flights right now that are coming into Sonoma County Airport. I think we're sort of fooling ourselves if we don't include those emissions. That's my perspective. And I know it's shared by a number of others.
Just to pile on, thanks, Tara. No, just point out that in the last year, since the 2022 scoping plan update was issued by CARB, they are now counting in the statewide emissions inventory intrastate air travel as part of the overall state footprint. And because many of our flights out of Santa Rosa Airport are in-state, they are being rolled up into that statewide number. So it might be worth adding at least that to be compliant, to remain consistent with CARB statewide GHG inventory practices.
Would it also be possible and or appropriate to include the big picture, not as part of the inventory, but as an informational adjunct of some kind, just to, to show the story, tell the story? It doesn't, at this point, I agree that it's controversial whether or not to include it in the inventory, but to present the information seems fair.
I can review what information we do have about kind of airport and the airport operations as part of the narrative report, and we can look to at this. Yeah, I don't think we have the ability to kind of do a quantitative analysis at this point and incorporate it, but certainly from a narrative perspective and talking about kind of the story and the kind of the issues involved, I think it's very feasible. So,
You know how to come. And is this okay? Would we take? questions in the
Absolutely.
minutes
This
today, I
is,
think.
and yes, please bring the
Yeah.
questions, because this is, I think it makes better sense as we're going along. And this is the type of input absolutely that we're looking for.
Yeah, I noticed that the scale of these different breakdowns is different. So like on the left, you see CO2 emissions. If you compare smart with off-road, it's a different scale. And so that is a bit confusing because it inflates some and it deflates other ones. So I would suggest that you adjust the scale and because people look at it on the same page and they kind of take it in simultaneously.
Very quickly, I just wanted to affirm and underscore Ty's point. It always strikes me when I read it proudly stated that air travel into Sonoma County Airport has increased by some percentage, and there's no mention of our greenhouse gas, our climate goals. So even if it doesn't fit within the scope of the ICLEI standards, it's definitely worth pointing out, obviating.
Steve, were you next?
So when we talk about aircraft, are we talking about the aircraft that get their fuel here? Or the aircraft that are creating emissions while they're in our airspace? How are we isolating this?
The guidance, we're not currently employing it, but the guidance, the protocol guidance that I believe exists is based around fuel consumption at the airport as a surrogate for air miles traveled, basically saying that aircraft that come into Sonoma County Airport would refill here to fill up their tank for the miles that would have been traveled to get or come from here. And it basically, my understanding is that the protocol is basically, it's based upon aircraft fuel pumped into airplanes at the Sonoma County Airport would be the way to quantify it if we went down that path.
Okay. And similarly, when we're using surface traffic, are we tying it to the mileage that it is raised within the jurisdiction? Or are we tying it to the home where the vehicle originated and returns to?
So you're talking about the vehicle miles traveled.
Vehicle
for
miles
on-
traveled.
For on-road transportation. So those values are coming out of our in-house Sonoma County transportation, our Sonoma County travel model that is assembled by Chris Barney and by Adam Garcia.
Right.
And those are updated every few years. So we're basically using the values from that. My understanding is that those numbers are based upon origin and destination, and that half of the emissions are attributed to the origin jurisdiction and half the emissions are attributed to the destination, the destination location. And so then that splits out the two different kind of VMT values, kind of says for any trip, there's half that goes to each destination. That travel model is going to be potentially updated over the course of the next year or two to a new style of model, an activity-based model, and it will kind of, I think, change some of the underlying parameters underneath that. I'm assuming that the values we get out to use, the output values will still be comparable. And that's, I think, a kind of a more detailed discussion around the intricacies of that travel model that I know are being discussed at some of the other kind of SCTA specific committee meetings. But at this point, it's half goes to an origin destination, half goes to, or an origin location and half goes to a destination location.
So if the origin is in Ukiah, it won't apply to us. The fact that the car drives through here.
I have to admit, I do not know how the values are calculated, say, for trips that from
pass
Ukiah-
through.
Pass through. If it's a trip that starts in Ukiah and ends in Marin, I don't think it gets counted in our model.
Okay.
If it's a trip that starts in Ukiah and ends in Santa Rosa, I believe half the emissions would be, half the VMT would be attributed to Santa Rosa.
Okay.
And I see Ty Stacker hand up with another question.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a lot of comments on this because it's so critical to public education. And I know that some of the dashboard features are going to be confusing to the general public. So I'm trying to, anticipate the kinds of questions that we always get. The airport emissions, getting back to that, I want to make the point that we shouldn't just be calculating Sonoma County Airport. When you talk about Healdsburg, we have our own little airport. There's a lot of luxury jets that fly in there, and I know they gas up. So I think we also need to include some of those other sources, not just Sonoma County Airport. So that's my thought.
My input too is that, yeah, we need a lot more calculations too. Let's say we, no longer have commercial flights coming out of Santa Rosa. Now we have folks driving to SFO or Oakland. And so, what are we saving if we have 2,000 folks flying out of here and instead they're being diverted to SFO or Oakland? And in all that traffic, they're sitting there to travel. I mean, what does the greenhouse gas look like? So I know these are hard things to capture, but I just hate to see us diverting our greenhouse gases over to SFO and Oakland.
Zeno, and then let's continue through with the.
Sure.
Get through it. Go ahead, Zeno.
Yeah, I wonder how the vehicle mount travels translate into greenhouse gases. So are you correcting that for the percentage of electric vehicles in each jurisdiction? So that we kind of actually feel that we're doing a bit of a good job, because there's a wide variety of adoption in Sonoma County per district, per jurisdiction. So I feel that if these numbers are just averages, maybe even depending on California fleet data, it doesn't really help us understand what the impact is of electrification in transport section.
So we use the VMT values that come from the travel model. We then cross-compare that with the MFAC data that comes from CARB. That data segregates out what is expected to be at a Sonoma County level, what is expected to be gasoline vehicles, diesel vehicles, and electric vehicles. We then calculate all the emissions having to do with the gasoline vehicles and the diesel vehicles and include that as part of the on-road. The electric vehicle, the electricity used for electric vehicles is actually then counted underneath our building energy number. And we're not currently segmenting that out and extracting that back out. We do something similar with our water conveyance value, where we actually calculate in two different ways and subtract it back out from the building energy. But currently right now, electricity used for electric vehicles is still counted in the building energy sector. And it's something that I think is a very valid point, that that's something where with some additional calculation and analysis that we could extract that out to basically then show gasoline vehicles, diesel vehicles, and electric vehicles.
Yeah, maybe I didn't quite understand you. So part of my question was whether greenhouse gas emission by jurisdictions are corrected for EV adoption in that jurisdiction, or are they global figures for the county?
I believe I would answer that they're corrected for EV adoption because that mix is included as part of the CARB MFAC database.
So that's by a zip code or,
It is Sonoma County averages. There's Sonoma County averages by vehicle type, and that we then put in different VMT values by jurisdiction.
Yeah, so it's not going to capture Healdsburg having a higher EV adoption rate versus Cloverdale.
But it is going to capture Sonoma County having a higher EV adoption rate than, say, Modoc County.
right, but in order to make these numbers actionable on a local level, you want to have a little bit more detail.
Yes, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take that as a note as something for us to dig into more. Yes, I think it's a very valid point.
So let's hold comments and get through it, and then we'll
Sure.
get into it.
Yeah, and I think I can go through these next ones
Okay.
fairly quickly. And as I showed from my first slides, building energy and transportation, those are the huge buckets. So we've now covered kind of 80% of our emissions profile. And now we can go through, if you keep going, we then collect information on water related emissions, water conveyance of pumping, and from wastewater treatment processing. And then you can go through and show, and now this shows a dramatic decrease between 1990 and 2010. And I think there are two things I wanted to point out really quick. One is we attribute this to a huge part of this to Sonoma Water's zero carbon water campaign that they worked on basically from 2010 to 2015, or from that they worked on around that same time, which dramatically reduced the emissions having to do with pumping of water. And then this is another area where I actually think there's some additional cross-checking that I'd like to do to go back and look at that backcast from 2010 to 1990 numbers. This steep drop has been reported by RCPA since the original inventory. And so I kind of have to trust that these numbers are valid, showing that drop from 1990 to 2010. But it is something that I've raised. It's something that stands out in my mind, that I think this is another area where we could potentially look at this. And in one area, this has also been a trade-off in my mind. Water emissions account for less than 0.5%, or approximately 0.5% of our total emissions. And so for those who work in water, it's incredibly important, but as part of the larger picture, it's something that I haven't given as much time to because of the how small of the slice that is. Okay.
Have you looked at the wastewater versus water conveyance as a split? Is it 50-50 or is it?
We have, I didn't show those slides and I'd have to look that up. It is, wastewater is much smaller. On the fly here, I just want to look something up really quick. No, I'm sorry, I had it backwards. Water, depending upon the jurisdiction, water conveyance is smaller than wastewater. It comes out water conveyance at under 1,000, wastewater at approximately 15,000.
Go ahead, Zena.
So,
Quick.
Yeah, so there are in Sonoma County maybe 15 water districts. Sebastopol probably the bigger one of the remaining one. And so are these numbers solely based on Sonoma Water, or are they including a special analysis of all these smaller districts?
I'm currently using values that are reported in the urban water management plans from each of the jurisdictions, and then correlating, tracking those back to the water district that they're from, and using different coefficients for the pumping, the efficiency of the pumping rate based upon different jurisdictions, or based upon the different water districts. even a number of the smaller water districts still get their water incoming from Sonoma Water. So a lot of it is still labeled as kind of grouped together as Sonoma Water. And then some of the smaller districts, if there's, and I'm forgetting specific ones, but there's some water districts that rely more on pumping as opposed to getting water directly from Sonoma Water. And so we try to calculate that.
But Sebastopol is not part of a management district, is it?
No, I'd have to double check my sources, but I believe that they still complete an urban water management plan on a regular basis that has values on an annual basis of gallons of water pumped and distributed.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go then quickly, solid waste. We get these numbers directly from the Zero Waste Sonoma. This shows kind of really continues to show the dramatic or the reductions in emissions that have to do a lot from the reducing organics in the waste stream, which is one of the main greenhouse gas contribibutors. So this kind of really shows the change over time of that. And then go ahead and if you keep going, Ross. We then, agriculture is our fifth and final kind of major sector. This is based upon fertilizer application and manure management. The values come directly our input values come directly from the Sonoma County Crop Report. And this is really, it is a fairly linear analysis. It really is looking at crop acres by type of crop, livestock count by type of livestock, and then applying a set of emissions factors to each of those kind of sub inputs. And this is an area where it's not taking into account specifically improved livestock or fertilizer management techniques here locally, but is still, I believe, using more of a statewide or a countywide average that we've kind of been using consistently through the course of the inventory. Then Ross, and there we can see that this is really kind of, so again, these numbers are very directly linearly connected to kind of acres of crops and head of livestock. And then we'll go to the next one. So there you can see the breakout by fertilizer. And then the next one shows the breakout by manure management. And then, yeah, go ahead and go to the next one. And then the last section I wanted to highlight, this is going to be oh, please, before we go on, please, Steve.
Can we go back one? What explains the big drop from 1990 to 2010 and then the return by 2015?
That I don't know. I do know that the 2010 number was calculated by our consultant team and that the 1990 was a backcast into the past.
So Steve, I asked that same question of Lauren Casey when she did that study. I'm sorry, of her successor, Alexa. And the answer was when the 2015 study came out, that there had been an inadvertent undercount of cattle in 2010. So it's in fact just a data anomaly, and it's really much more flat is the way we should interpret it. I have an email on that if somebody wants to verify.
I kind of have a guess on that too. If you guys remember the Great Recession in 2008, the milk prices were doing some funny things. We had to get rid of a lot of our dairy. The dairy dropped tremendously in our county.
Okay, so we're talking about the depression that's being affected.
So let's go ahead and keep moving. I want to highlight here, we're going to include a new section in this year's narrative report, kind of a non-numeric section on forest land and trees. We're going to pull from a couple of the reports that have been done recently by the county on their climate resilient land strategy and their carbon inventory and sequestration potential. We're trying to set up the framework for a kind of additional quantitative analysis in future years RCPA and a number of other organizations are working on carbon sequestration projects. And we are getting our kind of our minds around how to quantify and incorporate those so that we could show kind of the carbon sequestration, again, the reduction of carbon to match our emissions in an attempt to reach a climate or a carbon neutral kind of carbon neutrality. Go on. And so I kind of, and actually, so I have 3 questions, and then I wanted to show one other quick thing, even though we're running, this is taking a long time. And some of these questions I think we've handled here today. Wondering which of these results stand out as most noteworthy? What other information or themes could be included in the narrative report? And how do we best use this info to inspire action at the county-wide and the city scale? And before I open it up for kind of final discussion, yeah, if you were able to share that other document, because this came up earlier and there was a direct question. Ross is going to share, and we'll I'll be able to, we'll have this kind of for each of the jurisdictions early next week. But this is a sample of information I'm putting together. Maybe you can just make it the width.
Yeah.
And then we can scroll down. But it's just, this kind of shows the jurisdictional breakout that I'm able to run for each of the jurisdictions, showing the total numbers. These next ones are, I think, will hopefully be especially helpful. These are showing trends of emissions per household, per employment, and per person. And then we're seeing the corresponding, the bottom chart is basically then showing those, the increases or the trends for each of those, the input numbers. And then Ross, if you scroll down onto the next page, and then there's these basically all of the input data that is available, that after talking with the staff at the town of Windsor, they found this type of information very, very helpful for them to kind of go back and truth check some of this information based upon their understanding of local conditions within the town, and kind of looking for areas where they can kind of say, really kind of focus in on a specific sector or specific subsector. So that just, I wanted to show that to give a general feel for the information that we're going to include in the report. So with that, I think we can take a couple more questions, but I wanted to make sure we had time for the other material on the agenda.
Absolutely. A few more questions, and I definitely want to address public comment on this as well. You want to go ahead and provide any public comments, and then we'll jump back into the committee.
Yes, Steve Pierce from Sebastopol. I guess my impression from looking at it is it's very hard to tell if we're on track for 2030 or not. Cursory look at it, we're not on track. And to me, that should stand out very prominently, that we are not getting there, folks. And just a few kind of detail things. I think we're going to see in 2023, according to the numbers that I've digested from the PG&E data sets, natural gas use in buildings went up a bunch. We had a cold year in 2023. Some other kind of different takes on some data are around our transportation. So much of what we're looking at is transportation data, but we don't validate it at all with gasoline sales. Those sales are available at the zip code level from the California Energy Commission for zip codes that have 4 or more stations. And I would encourage us to get that data so we can kind of start to see, are our models for VMT at all in the ballpark? Because we can probably make some assumptions. How much gas do people buy that's local, versus how much are you driving outside the county on your gas? Because really what we need is the Department of Motor Vehicles to have a voluntary entry on your registration that says enter your estimated miles that you drove. Because have models on top of models on top of models for VMT, and they miss quite a bit of information. For instance, in West County, we had the major high school close in Forestville, and all of a sudden, a lot more people are driving. That would never show in a VMT model. It's just way too based on things that are much higher level than that. And I think those are the main points. I want to also say, yes, we need to track the airport stuff. And in particular, we have no clue about private jet traffic. We always hear these numbers about transportation traffic of, oh, yes, more passengers, but that doesn't include the private jets. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I want to go online. I see June has her hand up. Go ahead, June.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the other comments already made. And then a question and a comment. One was a question about how the county-wide allocations get allocated back to the jurisdictions. And I know there's probably many ways that happens, but I just wondered, do all of the county-wide emissions get allocated back, or is there a bucket of county-wide emissions related to some certain activity that sort of just stays as a separate bucket? Just kind of wondering about that. And then as far as the narrative, really at the beginning, I think for the public to understand, really like on the first slide, or, pretty large right at the top, it would help to say, what's covered and what's not covered in this, just because we have so many climate reports. Sometimes we're just looking at municipal operations, and then you go, oh, wait, that's all we're looking. So I do understand that this is all countywide activity-based emissions. But it would be good to, that's my understanding of this, it'd be good to have that on the front page, and then to also, note, right, that it doesn't include, the emissions we know that are related to our county from the consumptions of goods and services imported into the county. And I know that's been in other reports, but I think it should be pretty prominent for people to have that understanding and a basic estimate of what those greenhouse gas emissions are in size and related to the activity-based emissions. I found that really helpful just for setting the context of people understanding what they're diving into. And, as far as, and this might be more of a stretch, but I would maybe, at the end or somewhere, as far as motivating even more action, if someone looks at their jurisdiction and think they're looking pretty good in relation to other jurisdictions, having some sense when we get those per capita emissions for a jurisdiction, how that compares to a per capita emission to someone else elsewhere on the globe. And, in relation to what maybe the UN report is saying is needed per capita in emissions for a sort of global climate budget. I would be really interested in that, just as far as some sort of equity of our county in relation to the globe, since this is a global issue.
Thank you, June. And I would say, let's give this topic about five more minutes. And I would also encourage you to email BC if you have more detailed things. I just want to respect everyone's time and make sure we have time for another item or two.
I can give, before we take the next comment, I want to give just a bit of feedback both to Steve's comments and then to June. Steve, on the topic of gasoline sales and gasoline consumption, gas stations, I think that is something that we are hoping to bring in as an indicator through the climate dashboard. And so that's something that is on our list, working with Adam, that will not included in this report, but will hopefully be included as something where we'll be able to cross these kind of these different indicators that don't lead into our calculations, but that should be hopefully will help tell the narrative. So on the gasoline sales, I think we have been thinking about that. And for June, to clarify the question about the allocation of countywide emissions. So all of our calculations throughout the entire inventory are broken down into individual jurisdictional buckets, except for emissions from SMART, which we categorize as countywide and leave at that high level, and emissions from agriculture, which we categorize at countywide and leave at that level. And that's different from unincorporated emissions. So we basically have 10 jurisdictions and an overarching countywide kind of bucket. So smart rail and ag are the two that are not correlated back to individual jurisdictions at this point. So
Just very quickly, overall comments. I appreciate all the crunching that is going into this.
Sure.
I know it's an incredibly difficult job. One, I would suggest that we obviate consumption-based emissions, airline emissions, and methane emissions, both from fugitive emissions from gas delivery infrastructure and from landfill. But to underscore and echo what Steve just said, it's very clear that we're not getting there. We're not getting anywhere close to meeting our goal of 80% reduction by 2030. And that's one of the big takeaways for me. And my next question to all of us is, whose job is it to communicate these issues to the 50,000 people that are counting? 500,000, sorry. Off by it. That's it.
Go ahead.
I would suggest that on each of these graphs, we include where we need to be by 2030 and by 2045, so that anybody that's looking at them gets to know where we have to focus. We probably have to focus everywhere, but
Yeah, it seems that we have plucked all the low-hanging fruits. And right ahead, we'll be creating more resistance in the population. And one thing I think we should do is what we do with housing. We say, Sebastopol, you're not building enough. We say, Rona Park, you're doing better. I think what we should do is assign targets for each jurisdiction. You need to, by this year, reduce your emission by such and such. And then these jurisdictions can carry on that task and assign to neighborhoods. You need to reduce your travel. We need to really act in a manner that is in line with the emergency that we declared. We haven't really done that. I also would think that, like agriculture, we need to do that by superficial district, so that we have a better sense of which supervisor need to step up. These are my two comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I too appreciate the number crunching you and Adam BC have been doing, and that we have kind of close access to this and input at this stage. I appreciate that. The things that jump out of me are, I share a lot of the comments around the room, but I also feel like our sectors where we have previously seen significant reductions, particularly in buildings, has stalled out. And that seems to me to be a big surprise, because we thought we had a major push toward decarbonization of buildings through fuel switching away from natural gas. That does not appear to be happening between the 2020 and 2022 data. So in terms of what's actionable for the jurisdictions, I mean, the REACH codes are going to be fairly easy to implement, because, at least from a policy perspective, only touches the very newest buildings, the buildings undergoing retrofit, but that should be something that strongly, strongly supported throughout the county. I know it's part of our strategy, but it's not in the data yet. We don't see it yet in the data. On vehicle miles traveled, I'm troubled, or in transportation generally, we had the recession and we do have some residual hangover of reduction in vehicle miles traveled, I suspect. But it looks like we've taken back a fair amount of that, and we really haven't had reductions there. So I'm looking forward to seeing these indicators. You mentioned gasoline sales. I assume EV sales might be in a similar positive indicator, perhaps. I'd like to see the EV home charging, building charging starting to show up in these data. We'd expect to see electricity consumption growing. And I don't necessarily, I think we might have seen a little bit of buildings uptick, but we also saw natural gas go up. So I don't think we're seeing that breakout yet in electrification of buildings and electrification of transportation. So those are both big screaming red lights saying we're not making progress on our goals. Which brings me to the question of how do we start planning? If we're going to fail, what are the things that are going to collapse in our county first, right? I mean, we have to help. We around this table are thinking about these things. Most people in the county are not as focused on this as we are. And this is our responsibility as people in this room and online. So at my commission in the city of Sonoma, we have frankly not done very much on climate adaptation to date, but we're starting to try and think about that. And that's something I think we need to bring back to this group as well, is how are we going to adapt to what we see playing out in front of us, failing to meet our goals and the consequences. And one last point, if you just let me go on, because I go on too long sometimes. At a Caltrans meeting this past week, I brought up the new sag pond data from the Carrizo Plain, where they've gone into these ponds to look at the impact of floods in the South Central Valley. And it turns out that the 1862 flood that all of our modeling in California is built around that terrible historic flood. It doesn't even show up in the geologic record. What appears to show up, though, are two previous floods, much, much greater, apparently, in size. So we're probably underestimating how big the floods could be during this period of time when the climate's been relatively stable. We could be very much looking at major flooding events in California that are currently not on the radar for our flood projections. So these are the kinds of things I'm starting to get concerned about, particularly when we don't see ourselves making progress. So if I was in business, I would be very concerned about these things.
Thank you, Tom. Any last comments on the topic? And then we're gonna move on. But as I mentioned, feel free to contact PC or just the main email and we'll get it to.
Yeah.
I didn't ask him if that was okay.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted, before we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you and show my appreciation for kind of the input that's here today. Some of these things we can work on in the next couple of weeks and get incorporated into the report. And I think I will keep a secondary list of things that are for kind of longer term future follow-up that both for action planning and for the report itself. So thank you.
So the next item, relatively shorter one, but I wanted to get some feedback from the group as well. This is a staff report that was included in the agenda. Essentially, we have two issues in front of us with, this is more housekeeping kind of committee stuff. The first one, as we see, reaching a quorum is difficult. I don't know if today is totally representative because we did change the date to make sure this could get seen before the board. And then the other thing that we've heard from a lot of folks is meeting frequency. So, the committee currently meets quarterly. We've heard from a number of folks that bi-monthly could be another option. That said, if we're not hitting a quorum, that's not really going to help. But our goal is essentially to make sure that we can cover all the topics that we have, because we have been having some rather packed meetings, and we really want to make sure that all the jurisdictions get a chance to share what's going on, because in our opinion, that's a big part of, aside from reviewing materials of this group, is kind of helping everyone collaborate and know what other people are doing. So so basically, we want to get your opinion on meeting frequency, whether quarterly is okay, whether bi-monthly might be a possibility, and also whether we want to look into, and this is a little more of a kind of behind the curtain thing, but another way to count the quorum, essentially, not by individual. Obviously, this will need to be Brown Act compliant, and we'll run it by legal, but suggestions that have come up have been to just do it by, this committee is all appointed by our directors. They each appoint 2 representatives. So making each of those one seat rather than individuals would lower the required number. However, if 2 people showed up for one jurisdiction, they would just count as one. That's one thing that was suggested. And then the third thing, and I won't take it personal if everyone jumps up, this committee has not had a chair, and I'm just staffing it. Our other committee, we went through all the kind of past charter and everything. There's nothing precluding having a chair. So if that's something of interest, want to hear about that as well. Basically, if we come up with modifications to the meeting, we will bring it to the board in September, realistically, because of August often not happening. So I will open it up to the committee. Basically, meeting frequency, quorum, and chair are the questions. Want to get your opinion. And Tanya,
Ross, could you share a little bit about what being a chair would mean? Kind of looking at how our other committees operate, just so folks know how to say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the chair position, especially like for a Citizens Advisory Committee, is a good example of being kind of in the loop from the beginning, even when the meeting agendas are being put together, just to make sure it's a good balance, and if there's something that needs to be looked at and it's not overpacked, and also just time checking and making sure that things are flowing properly and everyone feels like they have a chance to be heard. So usually it's a chair and a vice chair is what happens. Did I cover it?
Yeah.
But yeah, does anyone have any comments?
I do. So in our bylaws, if you're a committee member, if you miss so many dates, so many meetings, do you get automatically dropped? What's in our bylaws on that?
No, it becomes a vacancy, and that essentially, this is what we've been doing for various committees, and then eventually that wouldn't count towards the quorum after 4. The issue is we don't have people, clamoring to necessarily join the committee. So dropping, if there's someone that's not attending and there's someone else that wants to attend and we can have one of the directors appoint them, that's great. But the way as it is now, it's basically what is it? 3 kind of no contact, not showing up. That becomes a vacancy, and we do currently have a few of those on the committee.
Well, I see here that we have like 4 people that haven't showed up consistently, and I was wondering if that would help the quorum, if you kind of put them out of the quorum mix for a little while.
Well, yeah, we're already calculating that into,
okay.
into the quorum. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But we'll make sure that we're counting. I mean, right now we're looking to get 11 people today. Go ahead, Tom.
So both Tyler and I are here representing District 3 today, and under the proposal, it sounds like there would only be 1 quorum member from District 3. If
Well, we'd
we were
also
recounting it that way.
We'd need, a quorum in the room regardless.
In the room too.
Yeah, just for Brown.
Or he could have Brown Act gotten
We were gonna do that if we had a quorum, which would be the AB 2449, like just cause. However, it still requires a quorum in the room. And just as a really
you.
quick aside, unfortunately, the legislation that we were following
I know.
regarding committees being able to meet more virtually is not moving forward right now. So we would love to have this be all virtual.
So in principle, if we think that might work, I would be in support of that change. I think this jurisdiction is the only one that has that situation, and it's probably pretty rare to have.
It happens sometimes, have both,
Yeah.
both members.
Yeah. So
Petaluma.
I think the bigger thing maybe is that the meeting is so irregular. I almost didn't make it today, but for David reminding me. And that's been my pattern in the past because it's a quarterly meeting and I'm set up for more routine meetings and because we changed the date today. So I would be very much in favor of bi-monthly to help with that. I think it might have an effect on quorum. And the other thing would be that all of us should maybe try to do a better job of recruiting or working with those jurisdictions that are having trouble getting a representative. Maybe we can help with that.
Yeah, if you do have someone that wants to serve, you can always let me know and I can, reach out to the various directors and try to, they will have to appoint, but all it requires is just an email from them. So we can try to match make a little bit as necessary. Go ahead, Steve.
An issue that I have been concerned about is that probably, well, a large percentage, I would say 80% of the greenhouse gas issues that we're talking about comes from industry and businesses. And so I wonder if we're shortchanging ourselves by focusing on jurisdictions.
Well, I think some of that is just the original makeup of the committee, which I believe we were talking about this morning, was kind of has taken on other roles, but initially was providing feedback on kind of a specific plan. So predecessors were really looking for just kind of climate expertise as opposed to like Citizens Advisory Committee, which is SCTA, but is now seeing some more kind of RCPA things a little more as well. That's more going for that kind of cross section of including business, whereas this was really kind of climate expertise focused, but that's something to consider too. It certainly make the meetings more contentious.
One avenue for that would be the Sonoma County Alliance.
To represent, just, well.
They have an environmental committee and getting a member on that committee would be a good idea. And arranging to make presentations to them from time to time would be a good idea.
So it's some integration with Sonoma County Alliances.
And then individual chambers of commerce.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about bi-monthly?
Yeah, I think bi-monthly makes a lot of sense. It's pretty difficult to maintain a quarterly calendar.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments? Oh, I see online, Tyler, you had your hand up for a little bit. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for your part in the presentations. Bi-monthly would be for me about as often as I could possibly go. I have to take off. I have to use PTO for these meetings, and typically it's a half day. And so with 2 kids, there's other things that I'd like to take PTO for. So I don't know that I could commit to every meeting on a bi-monthly schedule. The quarterly works for me. I'm also fine with going with the chair or vice chair. I think that would be, maybe give, empower the committee a little bit more. If we had some set rules on them being able to set the agenda and things like that, I certainly think I would be supportive of that. Those are my comments, and appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Tyler. Any other comments?
Yeah, just to make the crazy idea that what about 5 meetings a year as opposed to 6, and dropping one in the summertime, 3-month gap in the summer when a lot of people are on vacation, and then another one maybe around the holidays. So I came up with this is my crazy idea. Both January, March, May, September, or sliding it a month, starting in February. That would be 5 years.
Interesting. Yeah, that's how it works out. Go ahead, Pete.
I'm all in favor of bi-monthly.
Okay.
And no objection to chair and vice chair.
Got it. Thank you. And then back on, I see June has her hand up.
Yeah, I also like the bi-monthly and chair and vice chair. And my question about the quorum, if we had, one rep from each jurisdiction or 2 reps, but only one needed to make the quorum, would one then have to be an alternate? Or if both showed up, would they each get half a vote if there was a vote? I haven't actually experienced votes for this group, and maybe that doesn't happen so much, but just wondered if there'd be any rule that one would have to then be an alternate, or whether they could be equal reps.
Our concept was certainly, at least as we discussed, to have equal reps, but you bring up a good point with the voting. We may have to look into that. But yeah, it would essentially be by seat. We also have to make sure it's all good with legal, but thank you for that, June. Ty?
Yeah, I'm trying to process Tyler's comment and also my partner from Healdsburg. I think there is a little bit of a difficulty getting people who are working or who have small children, or, to get them into more meetings might be tough. So resolving that with one needs to be present might really help. And I think both Stephanie and I would support a chair and vice chair. But I'd like to say one other thing. And I think Stephanie has expressed this in some emails. I don't think they've gone to the whole group. But I think the way you did it today, where instead of giving us the information after it had already been given to the RCPA Board of Directors, was really beneficial. And I'd like to thank you for that, because then we feel like we're a part of making recommendations that are then going to go to the Board of Directors, as opposed to we can, watch that same presentation and then it's duplicated for us. I hope I'm making myself clear that it's just a question of process. And so I'd like to suggest that this was a good way of doing it.
Thank you, Ty. Zena?
Yeah, I think having a chair that can kind of re-energize this group a bit is a good idea. I'm not really in favor of changing the quorum rules. I think we are in a emergency for a number of years already. We're doing badly. I mean, I don't believe a little story that tries to explain all data every year. If we just look at the numbers and we believe the numbers are more or less correct, we're not doing well. So I don't feel this is a time to reduce the commitment of Sonoma County to this issue. And I think the input of this group, maybe we need a little bit more diversity. Maybe the supervisors and the board in general can be advised to appoint one business person, one person with more an activist background, so that we have more activity and more connection with the county. But I don't think that reducing the quorum just reducing quorum will maybe even reduce the attendance even more.
I see.
Right, so I don't feel this is the right time to do that. We need more people. We need to increase our involvement.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any last comments on this topic?
Since we got some crazy ideas, I'll add to that. In Iceland, after their economy collapsed, they did a lottery-based method of selecting representatives of the public to weigh in on certain things. Zeno's comment about diversity made me think of this, that one recruiting approach we might consider taking would be to invite 20 people from each jurisdiction to say, you've been nominated to serve on this committee to deal with climate change. And of those 20 people, please work together to find a representative of your jurisdiction and then see what that produces. It would be different from our self-selected, I'm retired and able to come here and spend my time. But it might bring new people into the room, and that might be different and valuable for us. Just an idea to chew on.
Thank you, Tom. And I know we are running up against time, but any announcements, report outs by jurisdiction? Let's go around the room. Let's start with Healdsburg. Any announcements that time?
Well, we just want to thank everybody who came to the Climate Fest. One of the things that we were most proud of in light of our discussion that we just had about broadening the membership of this group is that we had a large turnout from the Latino community. And we're still trying to process why that happened and replicate it. We're in the process of working with the city staff and have a very cordial relationship with those staff members who are trying very hard to implement the climate mobilization strategy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Healdsburg. And right now, our big goal, so I was really interested in terms of some of the carbon sequestration links that you changed or that you shared. We worked with the city to write a grant to CAL FIRE to update our tree ordinance and do some other things to protect the existing woodlands and all of that. So we're hoping that that's going to get funded. And then finally, we had a planning commission decision in the city of Healdsburg that threatens a blue oak woodland. So we have this great working relationship with city staff who are trying to implement the plan, but at the same time, there's some political decisions that are being made that required that we file an appeal. And so that's going to be our focus for the summer, is trying to save this blue oak woodland. So that's what, oh, and then the other thing is, and Stephanie, if she were here, would talk about it, the anti-idling campaign in Healdsburg has been very successful with the schools. And it's been a process of encouraging rather than trying to enforce the ordinance that already exists in Healdsburg that's not being enforced. It's more education of the parents, and the schools have been really responsive to those suggestions.
Thank you, Ty. And then going down the list, any Petaluma updates?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that I've been focusing most of my energy and attention on the plans under development, the blueprint for carbon neutrality, the active transportation plan, the mobility element of the general plan, which are just all these balls in the air, trying to make sure that they're all singing in the same key, they're all harmonizing. And they do not yet harmonize. And going to meetings and working with a very receptive city council, senior city staff, and city manager to change the culture, to change how we view our streetscape, from streets for the benefit of moving cars around as quickly as possible to streets for people and trees.
Thank you. And Runner Park updates.
Okay. As part of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, we are working with the Active Transportation Plan, and it's really a robust conversation we're having. I'm very proud to be part of that committee. And also today at Andy's Unity Park, we are celebrating groundbreaking with the smart connector for a pedestrian and bicycle from Roanoke Park to Santa Rosa. So if you want to go party with smart, go to the Andy's Unity Park in Santa Rosa at 3:30 today.
It sounds like there'll be you'll have a lot of company. I think a lot of us will be there too. For Santa Rosa, Steve, do you have any updates?
Things have been very quiet in Santa Rosa as far as the specifics are concerned, but they are really working on a pedestrian-oriented downtown. And of course, we noticed that there are lots of 4- and 5-story buildings going up, largely a result of the fact that we have train station. But formally at the city level, things are very quiet.
Thank you. And Sebastopol, any updates?
Yeah, I don't have really anything to report. I mean, Sebastopol is still in a budget crisis and we're kind of reshuffling what the city can take on. I'm not sure whether Steve had anything more up to date. I was sick for a week or so and I missed some of the meetings, but I think at this moment we don't have anything.
Thank you. Any Sonoma updates? I don't have anything. Let's see, Windsor, Tom, any updates?
Well, so I'll do a little Sonoma and then I'll talk about countywide issues for District 3. In the city of Sonoma, we've been continuing to work on we've initiated the work on our general plan update. We have the active transportation plan moving forward. We had a couple of public events down there, and was fortunate to be able to provide some detailed input on bike and ped improvements for the city of Sonoma. We're a small city, so we don't have the staff to even go after some of the low-hanging fruit grant opportunities that RCPA, SCTA has been able to make available to jurisdictions around the county. It's just a practical reality. But to Tyra's point, we did actually, one of our volunteer members of our climate commission filed one of those CAL FIRE grants as well. Waiting to hear on that. We have been spending time on trees in the city, joint commissions of the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the Climate Commission, Parks and Recreation Commission, all working to plant more trees. Parking standards have recently been harmonized. There's a phase 2 parking, perhaps climate-related opportunities in parking in Sonoma, city of Sonoma to come. Obviously more complicated and politically difficult to move some of that stuff forward. So we finally have a team of people in Sonoma actively working together on policy change as opposed to just keeping the bills paid. As for countywide matters, I think it would be important for folks on this committee to take a look at the upcoming Measure J. As BC presented today, we have seen no climate improvement in the agriculture sector in the county since 1990, less than 1% change. And so from my perspective, the only way that we are going to reduce agricultural emissions is if we reduce number of head of livestock. That's a very blunt force approach. I believe in local food, but I do not see any progress coming from the ag community in this county. So I encourage everyone who cares about climate change and the 12 or 15% that's on our local greenhouse gas inventory to reach out to your friends and colleagues in the ag community and say, what are you doing to get us to the 40% reduction by 2030? We know is a sectoral goal for every sector in the county. And with no movement, I'm actually feeling I have no choice but to vote in favor of Measure J, which would ban large concentrated animal feeding operations throughout the county. And encourage those folks to downsize their farms and diversify their farms, and in so doing, reduce the emissions of those farms. So look forward to hearing thoughtful commentary on this in the 2 months to come.
Thank you, Tom. Tyler, any updates on your end?
Nothing to add for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe June had to jump off. Did I miss any committee members? I don't believe so. And then lastly, any RCPA update before we adjourn?
I can give just a quick, so I think we've covered a lot of with the greenhouse gas inventory, and the dashboard is really where a lot of staff time has been going over the last month or 2 months. But we did partner with 2 CBOs, community-based organizations, Nuestra Comunidad and it's COAD, and I always, Coalition, Communities Organized Against Disaster, I believe is what it stands for. But we partnered with them to submit a grant application to the state's Office of Planning and Research, their adaptation planning grant program, for funding to develop a countywide energy resilience plan. And this is kind of a follow-up from a previous grant that we had submitted that was more focused on microgrid implementation strategy. And we've kind of stepped back from that focus on microgrids to look at developing a countywide plan that would help identify the best locations for solutions like microgrids and other energy resilient solutions, and identify potential funding sources. So we did submit that grant and continue to look for other grant opportunities for both RCPA as well as our jurisdictions. So, yeah, I think, I don't know, and is there anything you want to mention for Bayron?
Sure. They hear me online. But one thing that I do want to mention is that there's going to be a workshop on June 25th at the regional Roanoke Park Cotati Library on your energy efficient and resilient home. This is a series that's brought to you by the Climate Action and Resiliency Division with partnership through Bayron. And so they'll go over a handful of programs that offer financial and technical assistance for energy upgrades for your home, and also touch on some of the solar resources that are available in the county.
Thank you. Well, I think unless there's any other last announcements, we will adjourn. Thank you all for coming. Please take a muffin, take an apple for the road. Don't hesitate. And we will be in contact about we'll try to share things in advance of the September board meeting regarding frequency changes and that sort of stuff. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you.